Today, I'll explain muscle growth using 4 principles anyone can follow. I do this because I see many guys that over explain, or I don't want to say overcomplicate, because if you really care about this stuff, you can dive deep and do your own research and investigate. But I don't think it's useful to spend too much time thinking about things that I consider secondary when you're just starting out. And this is for people who are just starting out, so beginners. Anyways, the 4 principles are going to be progressive overload, recovery, diet, and lastly, volume. So, to begin with, I'm gonna try to look at the camera as much as I can, but I'm not used to it, so that's a disclaimer. Progressive overload. What is it? You need to be increasing weight or the number of repetitions, and it's usually better and easier to track the weight. That's the most common way to progressively overload. And if you're not progressing in one of these shapes or forms, you're probably not making progress. So let's say you've been lifting for a year and you're starting out lifting 10 kilograms, um, and a year later you're still lifting 10 kilograms, you probably didn't make any gains. Let's be real here. You need to be making some sort of progress. Any progress is enough, but of course, the more you progress, the more gains you're going to see, usually. But this is the main principle of muscle building. If you're not doing this, you're not growing. It doesn't really matter your diet, it doesn't really matter if you sleep enough, if you eat well. This is the main driver of hypertrophy. And that's number one, and that's king. Progressive overload. Second, recovery. You should be aiming to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Of course, this depends. There are some people who can live just fine by sleeping 6 hours, and that's good. If you're one of those people and you're not coping, then that's good. Get your 6 hours of sleep, and then you're gonna be fine. But if you're like most people, you probably need to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And of course, this should be quality sleep, not you waking up every 5 minutes. That's not quality sleep. And then recovery also covers rest days and deload days or weeks. Rest days and deloads are usually not necessary when you're a beginner, but you should be always implementing them. Otherwise, you risk running into overtraining, which is it's hard to happen, especially if you're a beginner, but it can definitely happen and you want to avoid it. Plus, if you're training too often, you're probably fatiguing yourself. And if you're fatigued, you are probably slowing down your progress. And yeah, if you train with a ton of fatigue, you're probably not going to be exerting the same intensity that you would if you were fully recovered. So if you're fatigued and you want to train, I would say hit the gym, work out, but do it lighter. Decrease the number of repetitions, lower the weight by 50%, or do something around those things, or just take a rest day. And how many rest days should you have in a week? It depends on how good or how bad you are recovering, but I would suggest to implement at least one rest day or two. How do you know if you're fatigued? How do you know if you are in a need of a deload? Well, you gotta be honest with yourself and ask you, are you lower energy than usual? Are you not making progress? Are you stuck? Well, those are signs that you probably need to take a day off or take it lighter for a few days or a week. Also, if your joints ache, this is probably a very good sign to take it slower for take it slow for a few days. Next, number three, diet. And I'm just gonna talk about protein here and a little bit of the other macros, carbs and proteins, but sorry, carbs and fats. But general rule of thumb is eat 1 pound of protein per pound of body weight. Now, 1 pound 1 gram per pound of body weight is a little bit too high for my liking. I think there are studies that show that you don't need that much protein. Imagine if you're 150 pounds, you would need to eat 150 grams of protein. Also, this is not a pound of body weight, but a pound of lean body weight, which is your muscle mass. And if you're a beginner, if you're just starting out, or if you're a regular person, you probably don't know what your lean muscle mass is, so you're just guessing. And if you want to guess, assume that you don't need as much protein. So do 0.8 grams per pound of body weight and you should be fine. So for example, if you wear 150 pounds, you do that times 0.8 and you get 120 grams of protein per day. Aim for that and you should be fine. More protein is not going to equal to more muscle if you go above that amount. And you also want to eat carbohydrates and fats. You don't want to eat only protein. Many people say you only need protein, you only need protein. Avoid carbs at all costs. This is all fake news. You need carbs. You need carbs. You need carbs to build muscle, and you need carbs to fuel your training. So, my advice would be carbs before training. I'm not saying don't eat any protein before training. I'm saying try to eat the majority of your carbohydrates before training, so you are fueled. And then after training, eat the majority of your protein. And what's left, it's a bit of fats that you can eat. I'm not gonna talk about much about that, but that should be it. If you're a beginner, you don't need to think too much about it. Of course, eat clean, but this matters the most if you're cutting. If you're not cutting, it also matters because if you start eating trash, you're gonna feel it in your workouts, but it's not as bad as you might think. Or muscle building, anyways. And lastly, volume. General consensus or the standard is to do 16 to 20 sets per week per body part. So, for example, my chest would be getting 16 sets to 20 per week. This means that if I hit chest twice a week, I would do, say, 8 sets on the first day and 8 sets on the second day. I would be getting 16 sets in total for that week. And that should, the same pattern should be repeated for every body part. Now, it says adjust accordingly because none of this matters if you're not recovering in time. You need to be recovering in time, otherwise you're not going to be growing. If you're not recover and you go train, one, there's not going to be enough intensity because you're going to be tired and your body's going to hard lock you into doing a less intense workout. And two, you're just going to be accumulating fatigue, which is not good because your body's always going to prioritize repairing tissue rather than building tissue. And building muscle is a very expensive process. It requires many resources that your body's not going to use if it needs to fix something. So, first, be recovered and then focus on adding more sets. How do you know if you're recovered? Well, go back to point 2. Are you fatigued? Are you not making progress? Are you stuck? Well, it means you're probably overtraining. Then, more volume equals more gains. This is always true. However, you need to be recovering. If you're not recovering, this is not true. And we have this graph that I took the time of making. Yeah, this is amazing. And what this graph says is that the more sets you do, the more gains you're gonna see. However, there is a point in which it's not really worth it to keep going because you're gonna get 0.0% gains, and at this point you're just wasting your time and probably accumulating fatigue. So which is that point? Well, for most people it's between 16 to 20 sets per week. Now, depending on how intense your workouts are, this could be much less. The number of sets could be much less, could be 8 sets per week, and that should be enough for you because you're going so hard that your body needs a lot of time to recover. That could be the case. If you're a beginner, It's probably not, but aim for 16 to 20 sets. And if you are fatigued or if you're not recovering in time, then lower the amount of sets, and that should be it. And that's for the video. These things are, in my opinion, what you should be focusing on when lifting at any stage. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner, if you're intermediate or advanced. You should always be aiming to get this 4 in check. And there are other things like supplements and, I don't know, more diet specific trains, frequency splits, but these are all secondary and they will come in naturally as you progress in the gym. So I wouldn't worry too much about them right now. I would lock in on this 4 and then we'll see.